Do you want to know how I've built this camper for this mini truck? What if I told you I built it all right here in Japan without speaking a lick of Japanese? Well, I'm here to tell you about the first and most important step, which is research. If I were to ask you what you thought the first step to building a house was, you might think that it's building the foundation. But I would argue that before that, actually picking a spot to build the house is probably going to be even a bit more important. The way that this translates into building rigs is doing your research before you commit to a vehicle and before you commit to a design. I think that this is one of the most important things to think about. And a lot of times people look past this because they see a rig, they see a school bus that looks really good, they get really excited about it, they see, trust me, it's happened to me, they get really excited about it and they just go for it. Make a big investment, they just jump right in, and sometimes it can come back to bite them in the butt. I know people personally who have been at an auction, they saw a school bus, they got excited, they bought it, and then thankfully, before they even started their conversion, they found out it had some engine issues. And long story short, they no longer own that school bus and they didn't even attempt another conversion after that. So before you get started off on the wrong foot, not to scare anyone away, I just want to emphasize doing your research before fully committing to anything. Now, where can you do research? That's a really good question. I always like to just look at other people. So there are a lot of resources out there for seeing how people did their build. YouTube, of course, is a really great resource. Before I started the Spontana bus, which was a 30-foot school bus conversion that I owned for 3 years and lived full-time in for a year, I looked at other people's builds. One of them was Navigation Nowhere. He still makes YouTube videos. Another one, they were formerly the Rolling Vistas, and now it's just Zenderson. They lived in there, lived and traveled full-time in a school bus as well. As for the mini truck camper, I couldn't really find a whole lot of other people who had done this before, and so we were kind of in a more unique situation where we didn't really have other design plans to basically steal from and then kind of put our own little touches on. So we actually looked at other full-size truck camper shell builds where people would build them themselves and put them in normal like Fords and Chevys back in the States. So we were actually looking at those builds, scaling them down into something that our very small truck could actually fit and pull around, making it a lot lighter. But we were still looking at their ideas and things that had worked for them, not worked for them in those smaller spaces as well. So even though you might be doing something totally out there, you can still pull the ideas from different places. I remember whenever I was building the Spontana bus, I was actually looking at building codes. I had never really built anything of that scale before, so I was looking at, okay, well, how do houses do it? And how do RVs do it? Because houses, you don't have to worry about weight, but whenever you are moving this thing around, weight can be a concern. And so I was trying to kind of piece things together. What is going to be a way to build this in a durable way, but also make sure that it's light enough in order to not potentially hurt the vehicle? Now, I've been approached by quite a few people who I'm close with who have been either thinking about doing a conversion or getting a trailer or an RV, whatever it is. And the first piece of advice I always give them is to have a plan with what you want to do with your rig. Because while a Mercedes Sprinter van may work really great for a couple who just does weekend rock climbing trips, that's not going to work well at all if you have a family and you want to do week-long ski trips. And so think about what it is that you want to use your rig for, because that's the awesome thing about rigs, is that you can customize them exactly the way you want them to be. I always say to think about what activities you want to do and what gear you're going to want to bring along. Because you don't want to finish your whole build, be super stoked to take it to the mountain for a ski day, and then not realize that you don't have anywhere to put your skis. The cool thing about the builds is that you can put custom racks to build your or to store your skis on the outside. You can also build custom storage on the inside that fits your skis perfectly, and hey, maybe it has drainage out the bottom, so that way whenever you get all that sick powder in there and it starts melting, now you have a spot where you don't have to worry about water issues later on because it just drains right out the bottom. You can make everything fit exactly as you want it to, as long as you do the prior planning and think about what you want to use your rig for your purposes. Think about, are you going to want people to stay with you? Are you going to have friends maybe crashing on the couch? So maybe you want to give them a little bit more room. Also think about what kind of weather you're going to be using it in. The Spontana bus, I knew that I wanted to use it in the winter, so I was concerned about pipes freezing. So I brought all the pipes closer to the center of the rig, so that way they wouldn't be freezing on the outside. I also put the water tanks on the inside, made sure that I had plenty of storage, that I could store my skis in the winter, and then I could also store plenty of rock climbing gear in the summer. So it was able to kind of work for both of those needs. I put in a wood stove so that way I could keep it warm without having to use a lot of electricity. Now, here in Okinawa, Japan, it's a tropical island, it's very hot, it's very humid, and so for our mini truck camper, we were not concerned in the slightest bit about things freezing. Instead, we put nice big windows on the side so that we can open those up and get a nice cross breeze to help us stay cool. We also put in a window air conditioning unit, and we're going to have the whole top of the camper lined with solar panels so that we can run that air conditioning unit for a few hours each day, because we knew that that would be very important to us, right? If we were at the beach sweating all day, or if we just finished a hike, being able to go into a nice, comfortable environment for a little bit was really something that was important to us. So it's also important to think about where you're going to be taking your rig. Are you going to be staying at campgrounds where there's water and electric, maybe even sewer hookups? Or are you going to be getting out there to more remote locations? In those cases, you can get to a lot of really cool places, but it is just going to cost a little bit more money if you do want to be comfortable, right? Because at that point, you're going to be putting on solar panels, you're going to have a lot bigger water tanks in order to go through those extended times before you do get hookups. So while people like to preach a lot of the free camping out there, it is free rough camping, and if you want that free luxurious camping, you really are going to pay for it. You're just going to pay for it ahead of time. Which brings me to my next point, which is budget. So be real with yourself on this. While again, during this research phase, you're going to be looking at these really awesome builds and seeing all these really cool things. But it's important to take a step back, think about how much you're going to be spending on this, how much are you willing to spend on this, because there's nothing worse than when people get halfway through their build, realize they don't have enough money, and then you see them every now and then pop up on Facebook, Craigslist, whatever have you, and there's a half-finished build that they can't finish. And so before you get too far into a build or before you even start, I would sit down and think of all the big costs and then realize that there's going to be lots of cost around those big expensive purchases. So while the solar panels you're looking at may be $1,000 for the whole set, realize that all the wiring for those, all the hardware costs so much more than you think it would. For every big thing that I purchase, like for $1,000 solar panels, sometimes I even factor in an extra $1,000 just in the wiring and hardware. Same thing for like plumbing in a toilet. Like you might think, oh, this is a really nice toilet, it's $500. That's how much a toilet costs. But realize that just then plumbing that toilet to your black water tank and the black water tank itself and all the hardware to mount that black water tank, the piping, the tools to cut out the holes, the tools to cut the piping, all that stuff really adds up. And so try to get as close of a budget as you can, but then definitely make sure that you aren't really stretching yourself out of your means. There's nothing worse than hitting a roadblock and then having to choose between what financially makes sense and what you probably should do as an adult, but then what you really want to do. And so it's best to kind of start off on the conservative side and then maybe give yourself the option to beef things up a little bit later on. So maybe instead of just going really hard in the battery bank department right off the bat and spending thousands of dollars on hundreds of amp hours of batteries, maybe start off with some smaller ones and then give yourself the option to build those up later on if you notice that those aren't enough. Well, that's all I have for researching your build. If you'd like that information and want more of it, then make sure that you subscribe to my channel. And if you want help with the next step of your process, which is actually designing your build, then check out the link in my video description. Until next time, thank you for watching and go build something.